Yeah.
It looks so fake.
Yeah.
It's like some little kid dropped their toy.
Trash.
Oh,
He's awesome though.
Splatoon 3 is officially released by the time this video is going out, and I'm sure nobody expected me to cover it since I said I'd be continuing the Mario series. Yo! But believe it or not, there's a lot of hidden lore to dig through when it comes to these squid kids. Of course, you're not really going to find this if you only play this series for competitive purposes, which is fine, but there's some great origins to uncover within the single-player campaigns of each game. So without a long drawn-out intro, just know that you're watching Origin Oracle. This little series I'm doing is self-explanatory at this point, so let's get going. Okay, so for those new to the Splatoon series, you play as Inklings, a race of squid people who compete in a popular sport of Squid Game. Just kidding, they're called Turf Wars, a game where you attempt to ink up more of the map than your opponent with your team's color, until a cat at the end of the round determines who did it best. And at face value, if you're just handed this concept, it seems like it's just Nintendo being Nintendo and providing a fun multiplayer experience for their audience and kind of throwing their hat in the ring into the shooter market. But believe it or not, this whole series takes place in a post-apocalyptic world, long after humans have gone extinct, and there's some pretty dark things that occurred prior to these squids becoming the dominant species. Most of the information in this video is found in either the Sunken Scrolls, which are collectibles that can be found within the single-player levels of Splatoon 1 and 2, or the Art of Splatoon books, which are Splatoon art books that were released alongside the games containing mostly official art, but some great trivia are within these pages as well. We'll have to go back in time over 10,000 years when humans were still around. In this version of human history, there have been 5 world wars, and of course the final one was the most destructive. A nuclear warhead somehow detonated in Antarctica, causing the complete melting of the ice caps, which in turn led to this massive extinction event from the rapid rising of sea levels. And let me remind you guys, this is just a game, it's not a prophecy. We're all good, right? We're gonna be just fine. So as you can imagine, most land animals and mammals were wiped out from this cataclysmic event, except for one cat named Judd, who was saved by his human owner simply known as the Professor. And the Professor managed to not only place Judd in cryogenic stasis, he also injected him with an immortality drug so he could go on living forever. So apparently the humans had all this amazing technology but could not do anything to save themselves. Anyway, more on Judd later. Shortly after, mankind would go extinct, but we know that a ton of the technology and facilities used by the humans stood the test of time, even after being submerged in the seas for thousands of years. And the water levels wouldn't recede until about 10,000 years later, but this forced many sea creatures that were thriving on this new aquatic planet to evolve into creatures of much higher intelligence, and thus the Inkling species was born, a humanoid squid that progressed and began to build civilizations, much like the humans of the past. So with all the remains of human technology and architecture laying around, the Inklings would reverse engineer much of what the humans left behind, repurposing it for their own use. But of course, there were other intelligent new species as well, the main ones being the Octolings, who evolved from octopi, or octopuses. I heard both names are fine these days, which makes me upset at how many times I heard people correcting others when I was young.
Insubordinate and churlish.
But all that salt aside, within Splatoon, we can see a species of jellyfish, sea anemones, fish, and other aquatic life that managed to adapt to living on land as well. And this would be the beginning of the Mollusc Era, ME for short. Okay, so I hope everybody's following this closely because we're still 2,000 years prior to present day, where ancient tribes of Inklings and Octolings are now thriving on land and leaving behind records of their new civilizations. You can draw a lot of comparisons to ancient Egypt based on the artwork that Nintendo provided for these particular tribes. And at some point, Judd is pulled out of his cryogenic chamber and is revered among these tribes for being able to determine the outcome of ink battles that were taking place. And he would keep this role for hundreds more years, as we see him here determining the winner at the end of every turf war in the modern day. So fun fact about Judd over here, the original main characters for Splatoon were going to be rabbits, and since that was changed, the only leftover from that part of development was Judd himself. For some reason I'm getting flashbacks to Toontown. Anyway, it wasn't long before the Inklings and Octolings would square up against each other to determine who had control over the limited amounts of land on the surface, which led to the beginning of the Great Turf War 100 years prior to present day. And I must say, I love how goofy the details are behind this great turf war. So apparently the Inklings were being decimated at first by the Octarians because they were unable to get up early enough in the morning to defend themselves. This being a reference to the nocturnal habits of actual squid. And while the Octarians had the upper hand, they also managed to construct a series of large machines known as the Great Octo Weapons to attack Inkling cities. But because somebody carelessly pulled a plug from its socket, the Inklings managed to make a comeback and force the Octarians to live underground in an area that would be known as Octo Valley. Okay, so one last detail that I found hilarious. In the future, Inkling historians would later change the narrative and say they won this war because of their superior number of limbs. I gotta love these writers for putting squid history revisionists in their Splatoon lore. It's amazing. So as you can imagine, the Inklings went on to build a rather successful city called Inkopolis, which is the main hub for both Splatoon 1 and 2, where they now take part in simulated turf wars as a sport and pastime. This brings us to the modern age, and the Inklings are seen to be a species that, aside from turf wars, focus highly on what's fresh and trendy. And of course, this gives you a reason to raise your ranks in the turf wars so you can go on and purchase trendier gear. We see a lot of pop culture baked into this squid society, with pop idols like the Squid Sisters and Off the Hook, all-out festivals geared around the turf wars, and cities that look kind of like Tokyo. I think Inkopolis is actually based off of the Shibuya area of Tokyo. But where did the ideas for all of this come from? Why squids? Well, Splatoon was developed by the Nintendo Entertainment Analysis and Development team, but the main brains behind Splatoon were derived from the Animal Crossing development team, and most of the credit should go to Shintaro Sato, who proposed a 4v4 territory control multiplayer experience with ink as the key mechanic. Most of the main concepts we see in Splatoon were conceived in the research phase, with emphasis on being able to hide in the ink that would be spread across the arena. But now they had to decide who would be moving around these maps, and the art director had to throw a ton of ideas at the concept, like animals, robots, and even Mario himself. Not to mention they had the idea of tofu shooting ink at one another through their noses. Yeah, that actually happened, and I'm glad that didn't stick around. But it was ultimately decided that playable squids would be the ones throwing down on this space. Now, how do you get a squid to hold a weapon to shoot this ink? How? You just make them humanoid. And that's how the concepts for Inklings were born, allowing the player to switch from human to squid form to swim and hide within the ink, and back to a humanoid form to shoot at other players. These were fresh ideas from young developers at the time who enjoyed playing first-person shooters like Call of Duty and Battlefield, and while drawing inspiration from that, they combined it with their own unique ideas to create this new stylish IP for Nintendo to debut on their latest console at the time, the Wii U. Fun fact, Monolith Soft, the creators of the Xenoblade Chronicles series, assisted with development for the first Splatoon. So you can thank them for both that and Breath of the Wild. I'm more or less convinced that Nintendo's gonna keep those developers in a cryogenic stasis at the rate they're churning out these games. So we fast forward back to modern day, with Inkopolis being this peaceful society, and it's only natural that the Octarians that survived would be plotting against them ever since their defeat. DJ Octavio, the leader of the Octarians, lives underground in domes left behind by the humans in an area collectively known as Octo Valley. At the start of Splatoon 1, the domes of Octo Valley are losing energy very quickly, which caused them to become uninhabitable, which forces Octavio's hand. So he heads up to Inkopolis and steals their great Zapfish, this massive energy-producing fish that provides power to Inkopolis, and uses it to power his great Octo weapons so that the Octarians can get their revenge for what happened in the Great Turf War, like the video. But that's where the player comes in. Your Inkling in Splatoon 1 is dubbed Agent 3, who heads down into Octo Valley to help Captain Cuttlefish and his granddaughters, the pop idol group the Squid Sisters, even though they're actually cousins.
Oh, the deception!
Go after all the Zapfish that Octavio stole and thwart his plan. So good old Captain Cuttlefish here was a member of the Inkling military back when the Great Turf Wars were occurring. But with Octavio returning to steal all the Inkling Zapfish, he creates the new Squid Beak Splatoon, with you as Agent 3. Honestly, if there is one part I loved about this campaign, it was the ingenious final battle with Octavio, which many of the Octarians believed was simply an epic concert going on. It involves Octavio DJing while the Squid Sisters assist you in hijacking his sound system to sing their Calamari Incantation song, which is known for its energizing effects and its ability to cure brainwashing, which in turn helps the Octolings under Octavio's rule. This song does slap though.
Childish can't be no homegirl dropping like the NASDAQ. Move white girls like this coke up my ass crack.
Personally, I'm a bigger fan of Off the Hook. Shout out to the greatest Splatoon idol group of all time. because I'm not sold on Deep Cut yet.
That 5-head dough.
In Splatoon 2, you perform a similar set of campaign missions when Octavio escapes his snow globe prison from the last game and steals the Great Zapfish all over again. Your new player becomes Agent 4 this time since Agent 3 is on vacation, and much like the first game, you go through a series of levels before you take down Octavio again. But if we're talking about the origins of the Splatoon world, we have to take a look at the Octo expansion, a single-player DLC expansion for Splatoon 2. You actually take control of an Octoling for the first time, who's completely lost their memory and awakens in an abandoned subway station way underground. You run into our boy Captain Cuttlefish again, who seems relieved that you're not out to splat him, but in addition to the captain, there's a mysterious telephone that gives you instructions to find him 4 things. Yeah, it's directly from the game, 4 things, that will allow the main character to ascend to a higher plane of existence. Okay, so that's weird, but let's go ahead and do it anyway, it's not suspicious. So you're officially dubbed Agent 8 by Captain, and you head out on your way to go through all the levels to collect those things for our mysterious telephone friend. Spoiler alert, you're just building a blender. Unsurprisingly, this whole thing was a trap to blend Agent 8, but this is all thwarted by the help of Agent 3, who pulls up with one of the greatest cameos in this series. This moment hits a lot harder when you've played hours of the original Splatoon. So the evil telephone revives a humongous human statue and reveals that he is Commander Tartar, an AI created by mankind 12,000 years ago tasked with passing on their knowledge to the next worthy species. But since the AI doesn't feel Inklings or Octolings are worthy, it decides to try and wipe them all out and wait for the next species instead. But we can't have that though, so we destroy it with the help of Pearl and Marina from Off the Hook, dressed as Biggie and Tupac, and I thought I would never see the day. But once this AI is destroyed, Octolings and Inklings find peace among each other once again, which is a great excuse to allow you to play as an Octoling in turf war battles from that moment on. So that is more or less the origin that we know of for the Splatoon world right now, but there are a few other weird species that aren't mentioned that much, and I want to talk about them too, like for example the Salmonids. There's another game mode in Splatoon 2 called Salmon Run where you're tasked to take on hordes of creatures called Salmonids as you gather their golden eggs and give it to the mysterious Mr. Grizz, head of Grizzco Industries. The developers of Splatoon themselves have come out and said that the Salmonids act the way that they do in Salmon Run to make themselves look tasty. They, quote, aren't afraid of dying and regard their death to be a cycle of life and think of all life being a part of this cycle, end quote. Not to mention, Mr. Grizz is literally some guy that talks to you through a bear statue. My theory is that he's probably some bear giving orders from somewhere else, which we may see revealed in Splatoon 3 since the single-player campaign is called Return of the Mammalians. But despite all that, it astounds me how well documented the lore of this game is. After dealing with countless Sonic videos, you all must understand how I feel. Then there's the jellyfish, which I think are the strangest species in the game. If you've played Splatoon before, you see them kinda just hanging out, both during turf wars and when you're walking around in Inkopolis. The majority of them can't speak to the Inklings, but it's shown that they are huge fans of the turf war battles and Splatfest. Hisashi Nogami, the producer of the series, has gone on to say that jellyfish are probably part of a hive mind, with him using an example that jellyfish couples aren't actually in love, but they're only imitating the behavior of couples. Despite all this, apparently, they're big sponsors of the turf war industry, so be nice when you encounter the Jellies in Splatoon 3. As for the fate of the humans, I highly doubt they're ever coming back in this world, but it's interesting to see the Inklings discuss the human fossils that they found. According to some dialogue from Marina, human bones can be found everywhere. But as for the rest of the mammals, we'll have to see what happens in Splatoon 3. This time around, we're headed to take part in the turf wars being held out in the Splatlands, within the massive desert city of Splatsville. 5 years have passed since the events of Splatoon 2, and the turf war industry has exploded in popularity. The developers have even released a map to show how far away we'll be venturing to get to Splatsville, with one singular train rail coming from Inkopolis, estimating it being a similar distance from Las Vegas to Los Angeles. So I'm excited to sink my teeth into the new content. If you want me to follow up on more topics regarding Splatoon lore, more specifically the lore included in Splatoon 3, let me know in the comments below. Or splat the like button. Let's say if I get 300 likes for it, I'll go ahead and do a follow-up. Because there's definitely no shortage of lore. There's even a Splatoon manga out there that we could dive into as well. I'm a huge Splatoon fan, so I'm curious to see if you all would like another Origin Oracle on the topic. Otherwise, show some love and splat that like button. This is the Mentalk signing out. As always, be safe. The Prophet has spoken.